My stepdaughter banned me from her graduation. But I discovered the cruelest truth. My stepdaughter sent me a text that read, "Don't come to my graduation. My real father doesn't want to see you there." On graduation day, I didn't stay home. I secretly followed my wife, her mother, as she attended, only to discover there was no actual graduation. Instead, she had planned a meeting between her father and my wife. The plan was to get them back together. I was just their ATM. I recorded everything and left. What happened next was almost unimaginable. I used to believe that family was something you could build with patience, love, and hard work, that even if blood didn't bind you, time and effort eventually would. I wasn't naive, or at least I didn't think I was. I knew that entering a marriage where a child already existed wouldn't be simple, but I did it with an open chest, my heart completely surrendered. I didn't go in trying to replace anyone. I just wanted to be a safe place for both of them, my wife and her daughter. For years, I paid the mortgage, covered the tuition for a private school. I made sure the fridge was always full and even took a second job temporarily when my stepdaughter needed braces. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just thought that's what you do when you love someone. And God help me, I loved them both more than I thought possible. So when I received that text from her, my stepdaughter, it hit me like a freight train. I was sitting at my desk that Friday afternoon, already dressed for her graduation. I had just wrapped her gift in blue paper with a silver bow and had placed a handwritten card inside that said, "I'm proud of you no matter what. With love from." I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was her. I smiled, expecting maybe a sweet message, perhaps a hint on where to park. Instead, I opened the message and read, "Don't come to my graduation. My real father doesn't want to see you there." That was it. No greeting, no thanks, no explanation, just that cold, distant sentence, as if I were nothing more than an unwanted guest in her life. I stared at the phone for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen, not knowing how to respond. My heart didn't just sink, it shattered into 100 silent, sharp pieces. In that moment, I didn't feel anger, just disbelief. And then a sort of slow, creeping numbness. I sat there in the silence of my office, staring at the walls I helped paint when we moved into the house. She had chosen the colors, cool blues and soft grays. She said she wanted the place to feel peaceful. Back then, I took that as a sign we were building a home together. I didn't realize I was the only one who saw it as permanent. Looking back, there were signs I overlooked. How her face would light up when she talked about her father. How she rarely called me anything other than David, never Dad. Even though I raised her since she was 10, I ignored those signs because I didn't want to admit that maybe I was never fully accepted, that maybe all my sacrifices didn't make me family. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that message didn't add up. Not just the cruelty of the content, but the strangeness of the timing. I knew the graduation date, it had been on the calendar for months, but something felt wrong. That night, I didn't sleep much. My wife, Melissa, acted as if nothing had happened. She didn't mention the text. She didn't ask if I still planned to attend. In fact, she was unusually cheerful. The next morning, she put on that coral dress I once told her looked beautiful on her. She smoothed her hair and took longer than usual with her makeup. I watched her from the hallway as she dabbed on perfume and looked at herself in the mirror. When I casually asked what time the ceremony started, she blinked as if she'd forgotten I existed and said, "Oh, it's at 1. But maybe it's best you don't come. You know, after the text." No apology, no comfort, just that same dismissive tone that made me feel like I was intruding on an event that wasn't mine. But I didn't stay home. Call it suspicion, desperation, or the last stand of a man clinging to what little pride he had left, but I followed her. I waited 5 minutes after she pulled out of the driveway, then got in my car and drove. I kept 2 cars back, careful not to get too close. We didn't get to the school. Instead, she drove 20 minutes to a trendy restaurant downtown. Nothing like a graduation venue. No balloons, no caps and gowns. Just her, sitting at an outdoor table, nervously checking her phone. Then he appeared, her ex-husband, her daughter's real father. They hugged. Not a quick, polite hug, but a long, slow one. She touched his face as if trying to memorize it. Then her daughter arrived, beaming. I parked half a block away, walked closer, and hid behind a van. My stomach twisted into a knot seeing the three of them there, laughing, eating, reconnecting as if no time had passed. Then I took out my phone and started recording. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. I told him not to come, my stepdaughter said proudly. He was never part of this family anyway. Melissa nodded. He was always temporary, but he helped us stay afloat. Now we can move on. The man smiled approvingly and said, "You did what you had to do." It was like watching my own funeral, except I wasn't dead. Just discarded. I stood there, frozen, as the truth washed over me. I was never the husband, never the father. I was just the ATM. When I got back home, I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was too empty. I sat on the edge of the bed, the recording still playing through my headphones. I listened to it 5 times, not to torture myself, but to make sure I wasn't imagining it, that I hadn't misunderstood something. But each time, it was the same. Cold. Calculated. Clear. I had been used. And while the pain of that revelation was unbearable, another feeling slowly began to take shape, clarity. I now knew what I was dealing with. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel confused. I felt ready. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. Not physically, but spiritually. It's the only way to describe it. I woke up before the sun came up. Not because I had anything to do, but because sleeping no longer felt like an option. My mind was racing, even though the truth was no longer a mystery. I knew what I had seen, I knew what I had heard. The video was saved in 3 places, my phone, my laptop, and an external drive. Because if they were going to kick me out of the life I built, I was at least taking the receipts with me. Melissa moved through the house that morning, humming a tune, as if she hadn't just shattered a man the day before. She poured herself coffee in the mug I bought her for Mother's Day, the one that said, "Best bonus mom," supposedly chosen by her daughter. It all seemed almost comical now. I wondered how long she'd been rehearsing that smile, how long she'd been planning this slow, quiet betrayal. I told myself I would wait a few days before doing anything. I needed to think, to plan. But grief doesn't obey a timeline. It seeped into every hour until I felt like I was living inside a wound that refused to close. I watched them from the shadows of my own home, their laughter in the kitchen, the clinking of silverware at dinner, the soft knock on the door when Melissa brought her daughter a bowl of strawberries and cream. None of it was for me. I no longer existed in that space. I was just a fixture, an invisible hand that signed checks and paid bills. I even caught myself looking at the refrigerator magnets, noticing how every picture of the 3 of us had been slowly replaced by photos of just the 2 of them, or worse, old photos with her ex. It was like watching someone erase me in slow motion. But I couldn't remain passive. I needed to understand how deep this lie went. So 2 days later, I took the day off and started digging. I drove to her school under the pretense of surprising her with flowers and a card. An excuse, really. The lady at the front office was kind, but looked confused when I asked about the graduation date. She pulled up the schedule on her computer and furrowed her brow. "Our graduation ceremony was last month," she said. "We don't have anything scheduled this week." A chill ran down my spine. I asked if my stepdaughter was perhaps attending a different event. "She finished her credits early," the woman added. "She didn't participate in the ceremony." I thanked her, turned around, and walked to my car in silence. So, it had all been a lie. There was never any graduation. They just needed an excuse to keep me away while they staged their little reunion. That wasn't just deceit, it was coordination. The rage didn't hit me right away. It settled in slowly, like a low, quiet fog, but suffocating. I sat in my car for over an hour, staring at nothing, replaying every conversation I'd had with Melissa over the past month. The fake excitement about buying a dress, the fabricated stress about whether her daughter's father would behave if he showed up. She even asked me to write a speech, saying I might get to give a toast at the family dinner afterward. I had spent 2 nights writing that thing, choosing the perfect words to honor a girl who never saw me as anything more than a temporary wallet. That was the worst part, really. Not the money, not the betrayal, but the fact that I had tried so hard to belong to people who never once tried to belong to me. I didn't confront her right away. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I didn't even mention anything at dinner that night, because somewhere inside me, a part one didn't even recognize had already accepted that this wasn't my family anymore. Maybe it never was. Instead, I kept up the act. I did the dishes, watched the news, even gave her a kiss on the cheek when she went to bed. But that night, I sat on the floor of the guest room with my headphones in, listening to that recording again. Not to hurt myself, but to remind myself what survival sounds like. Because I was preparing for something bigger than revenge. I was preparing for freedom, the kind that only comes when you stop begging for love and start reclaiming your dignity. 2 days later, Melissa told me she was spending the afternoon with a friend. I nodded without a word. I already knew she wasn't going to any friend's house. She was going to see him again. I had installed a GPS tracker on her phone, not out of spite, but because the lies had turned trust into a foreign language. And sure enough, she parked at the same restaurant. This time, I didn't follow. I stayed home and opened a new folder on my laptop titled Insurance. I added screenshots, emails, timelines, audio clips, everything. Not to destroy her, but to protect myself from what I knew was coming. Because people like Melissa don't leave quietly, they rewrite the narrative. And I refused to let her paint me as the villain in the story I had bled to write. That night, she came home smelling of his cologne. She was laughing on the phone when she walked in, her tone shifting the instant she saw me. "Oh, hey, honey," she said, dropping her purse. "Gonna grab a quick shower." I just nodded again. I had mastered the art of silence because I knew something she didn't. The countdown had already begun. And while she was busy reliving a past, I was preparing to close a chapter. Not with fireworks, not with revenge, but with the kind of calm that comes when you've already walked through the fire and discovered you didn't burn. You hardened. 3 weeks passed, but in my head, it felt like years. Time had become a thick, bitter syrup, where every morning felt like walking through a house haunted by the ghost of the man I used to be. Melissa continued moving through the house as if nothing had changed. She cooked, scrolled through her phone on the couch, hummed while folding laundry. But to me, every corner had become a crime scene. The kitchen, where I'd stood barefoot at 6 a.m., making pancakes for her and her daughter, believing I was a father. The living room, where we'd watch Christmas movies, my arm around her shoulders, her head on my chest, while her daughter scrolled through TikTok, occasionally smiling at something I said. It all felt like a stage I had built with my own hands, only to discover the actors never intended to include me in the final act. I didn't talk much anymore, not out of spite, but because I didn't trust myself not to break the illusion. I knew something was coming, and I had to let her continue to believe she had the upper hand. I became what I now call a ghost husband, present in form, but hollow in spirit. I went to work, paid the bills, showed up for dinner on time, but inside, I was already gone. Every smile was rehearsed, every gesture calculated. I had become a man watching the slow-motion disintegration of his own life, taking mental notes for the inevitable final scene. And not once did she ever notice. And that told me everything I needed to know. It happened on a Thursday. Gray sky, drizzle tapping against the windows like a metronome, marking my last few seconds of pretending. I got home a little early from work. Melissa was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila envelope in front of her, carefully sealed. She didn't look up when I walked in, just slid it across to me as if we were strangers negotiating a sale. "I think it's time," she said, her voice firm, almost rehearsed. "I've been unhappy for a long time, David. I want a divorce." I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just looked at the envelope for a few seconds, then at her, and finally asked, "So, this is it?" She shrugged. "It's been this way for a while. I just didn't want to hurt your feelings before, but it's time. I need to do what's right for me." I didn't laugh, but something inside me wanted to. Not out of joy, but out of sheer disbelief. This woman who had smiled and kissed me the night before was now acting as if she were releasing a caged bird. But I didn't say what I knew. Not yet. I asked her what she was looking for. Her answer was quick, firm. 50%. I think that's fair, considering I've contributed emotionally, if not financially. This house, your savings, I just want what's mine. And it was in that instant that I felt it. Not rage. Not betrayal. But something colder, purer, clarity. As if a rope had been cut from around my neck and I could breathe again. I gave her a simple nod. Okay. No arguing, no pleading. Just that. Because if she thought I was still the man who would hand over everything out of guilt or confusion, she was dead wrong. What she didn't know was that her daughter's fake graduation had not only been an emotional breaking point, it had been the start of a very real legal paper trail. I had already consulted a lawyer. I had already sent copies of the video and transcripts of the recordings. I had already prepared for every legal angle of this downfall. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to walk away clean. A few days later, the official notice arrived. She had filed for divorce and listed her demands, half of the marital assets, half of my retirement fund, and even spousal support for the emotional labor she'd performed during the marriage. I almost choked on that part. Emotional labor from the same woman who staged a fake graduation to reunite with her ex while using my money to fund the charade. If it hadn't been my own life, it would have been almost admirable. The audacity, the absolute lack of shame. Unbelievable. But courts don't run on emotions, they run on evidence. And I had plenty. When our court date arrived, she walked in confidently, dressed in sober tones, her lawyer at her side. They were smiling like they were already on their way to the bank. I wore a simple suit, no tie, enough to show respect but not so much that I looked desperate for sympathy. I didn't need it. I had the truth. Her lawyer started with his plea, painting Melissa as an emotionally neglected wife who had invested years in a marriage with a cold, distant man who was too focused on work. I let them talk. Let her cry. Let them build their narrative like playwrights on opening night. And then it was my turn. I asked the judge for permission to present evidence before making my statement. She nodded. I submitted the file, audio, video, screenshots, documentation of everything I had endured. The judge listened to the audio in private, her brow furrowing. Her expression shifted from polite interest to visible discomfort. She watched the video in silence. Then she looked at Melissa. "Do you wish to respond to this?" she asked. Melissa's face turned the color of wet chalk. Her lawyer stammered something about context and emotional manipulation, but the judge cut him off. "This isn't just a broken marriage," she said firmly. "This is calculated deceit. I see no grounds to award spousal support, nor any reason to divide assets in favor of someone who enters this court in bad faith." It was over. Just like that. The judge dismissed her claims and ordered her to pay my legal fees in full. Her lawyer looked stunned. Melissa looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. And me? I just stood there. Calm. Serene. Not triumphant, but satisfied. Because for the first time, someone had seen the whole picture. Not just the crying actress, but the tired, silent man in the background, the one who had loved deeply, given completely, and been left with nothing. Until today. Leaving that courthouse didn't feel like victory, it felt like survival. The kind of survival where your skin is still hot, your heart is still beating, but the wreckage is still smoldering behind you. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just walked down the courthouse steps like a man finally setting down a burden he'd been carrying for too long. Melissa was walking a few paces behind me in silence, her heels clicking out a rhythm of shame. Her lawyer was already on the phone, likely figuring out how to explain this disaster to his next client. I felt her eyes on my back as I reached my car. She didn't call out, didn't apologize. She just stood there with her arms crossed, as if I had done something wrong by not letting her take half my life. I sat in the car for a long time, not because I needed to, but because I could. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing to anticipate, nothing to check, no legal strategy to organize. Just silence. Pure, unmanipulated, agenda-free silence. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I ended up at a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind that hasn't changed in 20 years, with vinyl booths, burnt coffee, and a waitress who calls everyone honey. I ordered a black coffee and a slice of pie and just stared out the window as the rain streaked down the glass, like the world was washing itself clean. But peace is never the end of the story when pride is wounded. I should have known Melissa wouldn't let things die cleanly. That same evening, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance, a guy we both knew through her family. "Dude, what the hell happened?" he asked. "She's telling everyone you ambushed her in court with faked evidence, that you recorded her without consent and manipulated her daughter into looking like a liar." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so pathetically predictable. I told him the truth. I sent him a copy of the judge's final ruling. He didn't say much after that, just a quiet, "Damn, man. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was like that." And then came the posts. Melissa's daughter, my now ex-stepdaughter, took to social media with the kind of performative outrage only teenagers can manufacture. She posted a picture of herself and her father at the fake graduation brunch with the caption, "Blood over everything. The real ones know the truth." Then she uploaded a second post, clearly aimed at me. "Being an ATM doesn't make you a father. Being present does." The comments section exploded. Some friends cheered her on. Others asked awkward questions that she ignored. A few mutual acquaintances tagged me, probably hoping for a response. But I stayed silent. Not because I lacked the words, but because some people don't deserve your side of the story. Some people need to remain wrapped in their own illusions. Let them. But the fallout didn't stay digital. The real-world ripples came quickly. Melissa's sister, a woman I'd always respected, called me privately. "Look, I love my sister," she said, "but I can't defend what she did. I didn't know she was going behind your back like that." She admitted that even their mother was horrified when she found out the graduation never happened. "She feels like an idiot," her sister added. She even bought a new dress for the ceremony. I could tell it pained her to say those things, but she said them anyway. And that meant something. Maybe not enough to heal everything, but enough to remind me I wasn't crazy. A few days later, the last ember of the whole mess flared up again. Melissa called me. It was just after 9 p.m. I was watching an old movie in the living room, trying to remember what normal felt like. My phone lit up with her name. For a second, I hesitated. I thought about ignoring it. I thought about blocking her. But curiosity won. I answered. "Hello." Silence. Then a shaky breath. "I just wanted to say, you didn't have to humiliate me like that," she said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Just that. "I know I made mistakes," she added. "But we were a family. You didn't have to turn it into a court spectacle." And that's when something inside me snapped. Not with anger, but with finality. You turned this into a spectacle the moment you staged a fake graduation, I said, my voice calm. The moment you turned me into a stranger in my own home. You don't get to rewrite this now just because it didn't go your way. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, softly, I just thought we could go back to the way things were. I almost laughed again. The delusion was still alive. There's no going back, I said. Only forward. And you're not in that direction for me. I hung up before she could reply. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. In the weeks that followed, I put my life back in order, literally and metaphorically. I cleaned out closets, sold furniture she had picked out, donated anything that felt like a ghost of her presence. I took back the master bedroom, took down old photos, and repainted the walls she insisted be sage green for calm. I chose a deep blue. It wasn't calming, but it felt honest. Like me. But the real change happened inside. I started sleeping through the night again. I stopped checking the front door every time I heard a car. I started calling old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, not to vent, but just to reconnect. Slowly, piece by piece, I was rebuilding something no one could ever take from me again, self-respect. And not the kind you boast about on social media. The kind that's born from the truth. From surviving a betrayal without becoming bitter. From choosing dignity even when revenge would have tasted sweeter. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Not loudly or explosively, but like that quiet, corrosive ripple that moves through distant relatives and shared friend groups like a gas leak. You don't see it, but you start to smell that something is wrong. The whispers started first. I'd walk into the grocery store and catch glances that were a little too long to be casual, a little too quick to be friendly. Some familiar faces would give an awkward nod, unsure which version of the story had reached them. Others avoided me altogether, likely afraid of having to pick a side. I didn't blame them. Scandal does that. It turns people into cowards, even the ones who know the truth but are afraid to say it out loud. A week after the court ruling, I got a call from one of her cousins. We were never close, but she had always treated me decently. David, I just wanted you to hear it from me, she began. Melissa is telling people you hacked her phone and edited the recording, that you hired a private investigator to fake evidence. I didn't get angry. I just sighed. Let me guess, I said. She didn't mention the judge's decision. The cousin was silent for a few seconds. No. She said it was a biased court. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Of course she did. But not everyone bought her version. Her own aunt, an elderly woman I had helped move into a new apartment 2 years ago, sent me a short but telling Facebook message. Sometimes the masks people wear eventually fall off. I'm sorry you had to go through this. That message stuck with me. Not because of the apology, but because it confirmed what I was already starting to accept inside. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive. And eventually, it does. The real turning point came when someone leaked the full audio. It wasn't me, I had only shared it with the court and my lawyer. But someone, likely in her own family, decided enough was enough. A few clips started making the rounds in group chats. Then it hit a local Facebook group, the kind where people post about lost dogs and community events. Suddenly, there was a post titled, "Fake Graduation or Family Fraud?" It included a screenshot of her and her ex at the brunch, a brief explanation of what happened, followed by an audio clip of my stepdaughter proudly saying, he was never part of this family anyway. The comments were brutal. Some were stunned, others were furious. A few claimed they'd always been suspicious of her, but most were empathetic toward me. Strangers started tagging me, offering support, even sharing their own stories of betrayal and manipulation. It was strange to feel validated by people I didn't know, but it didn't make me feel good. It made me feel understood. Seen. And that was more powerful than any court ruling. Melissa, on the other hand, did not take it well. She posted a long, defensive rant about privacy violations and toxic men who use money as a weapon. She painted herself as a misunderstood woman trying to reconcile her past for the sake of her daughter. She claimed I had twisted everything to make her look like a monster. But the internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive easily. People started sharing screenshots of her old posts, pictures of expensive gifts I'd bought them, with captions like, "My rock, my provider." One comment read, "You called him your rock. Now he's your enemy. Sounds like you just lost access to the money." That single comment got hundreds of likes. But the hardest part wasn't what happened online, it was what happened in person. One Saturday afternoon, I ran into her and her daughter at a local coffee shop. I didn't plan it, I just wanted a coffee. They were sitting outside, laughing as if the past few weeks hadn't happened. The second they saw me, the daughter's smile vanished. Melissa tensed up. I gave a polite nod and walked past, but as I waited for my drink, I overheard their voices. "He's so dramatic," her daughter whispered. "Still hanging around here like we owe him something." And that pain hit me in a way nothing else had. Not because of what she said, but because of how casual it was. As if I had never truly mattered. As if the years I spent trying to be a father figure, a stable provider, a loving husband, were just a footnote in her story of inconvenience. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. Just one sentence, "Hope you're happy now." No name, no context, but I knew it was from her. I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. Not because I didn't have a response, but because I finally understood that I didn't need to give one. Happiness was no longer something she had the power to measure. She could post all the rants she wanted, invent all the lies she could, but at the end of the day, I was free, and she was still trapped in her own web. In the following days, I noticed small, subtle shifts in how people treated me. Neighbors who used to just wave now stopped to ask how I was doing. An old coworker reached out to grab a beer. Even a friend of Melissa's, who had pointedly unfriended me in solidarity, sent a quiet message apologizing. I didn't hold a grudge against any of them. People choose safety, and in messy breakups, silence often feels like the safest place to land. But now that the truth had started to seep out, people were starting to come back to reality. To me. But perhaps the most unexpected moment came from the person I least expected, Melissa's mother. She called me out of the blue one evening. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won again. Her voice was soft, trembling. "David, I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to say this. What my daughter and my granddaughter did was wrong. It was cruel. And I did not raise her to be that way. I didn't say anything, just let her talk. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but for what it's worth, I'm sorry. And thank you for everything you did for them. I saw it, even if they didn't." That one hit differently. Not because it changed anything, but because it reminded me that not everyone in that family had lost their sense of right and wrong. I hung up that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. Not the storybook kind of closure, but the real, gritty kind. The one where not all the wounds are healed, but the bleeding has stopped. Where you can still feel the scars, but they don't ache every time you move. The kind of closure that doesn't come wrapped with a perfect bow, but with a door that finally clicks shut in silence. It's strange how peace doesn't announce itself. It doesn't burst into your life with sirens and confetti. It just arrives one quiet morning when you realize you haven't cried, or cursed, or clenched your jaw in days. It sneaks into the silence of making coffee for one and enjoying the stillness. It shows up when you catch yourself smiling for no reason, with no one to impress, no one watching. Just a moment of weightless joy. That's how I knew I was healing. Not because someone forgave me or apologized or made things right, but because I stopped needing any of those things to be okay. I finally learned that peace isn't something others give you. It's what's left when you stop giving your energy to people who only ever saw you for what you could provide. In the end, I stayed in the house. I thought about selling it, about leaving and starting over somewhere new. But then I realized, why should I be the one to leave? I had built this life, paid for this roof, these walls, this foundation. It wasn't the house that had failed me, it was the people inside it. So instead of running, I reclaimed it. I took down the old curtains she had chosen. I repainted every room that reminded me of a compromise. I emptied the closets, packed her things in boxes, donated what was usable, and threw out the rest. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it to breathe again. Every drawer I emptied, every photo I replaced, was like exhaling for the first time in years. The guest room became my sanctuary. I turned it into a small studio, something I had always wanted but never made time for. I pulled out an old guitar I hadn't touched in over a decade. I bought canvases and paints. I was never good at art, but I wasn't trying to be good. I just wanted to be free. And in that small, chaotic, colorful room, I rediscovered parts of myself I didn't even know I had buried. I started writing music again. Nothing polished, just raw lyrics and chord progressions that came out of nowhere. It was the most honest thing I had done in years. Every now and then, her name would still come up. A friend of a friend would mention her in passing. I heard once she was dating someone new, though rumor had it that it wasn't going well. Apparently, her daughter had moved in with her biological father full-time. I felt nothing when I heard it. Not relief, not joy, nothing. And that was the most powerful feeling of all. Because when you stop wishing for justice, when you no longer wait for karma to do its job, that's when you know you've truly let go. I had stopped looking back, and the view ahead, though unknown, was clear. Still, I sometimes thought about the little things. Like the way her daughter used to call me D, with a smile like it was our inside joke. Or how Melissa used to trace circles on my arm as we fell asleep. I didn't miss them, but I missed the version of me that believed those moments were real. That version of me had been softer, more hopeful. And while I wouldn't trade the clarity I have now, I sometimes mourn the innocence I lost in the process. It's a strange kind of grief, missing the man you used to be, even if he was a fool. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, I found a box I'd forgotten. Inside was a scrapbook Melissa's daughter had made for me 3 Christmases ago. It was filled with little notes and printed out photos, some candid, others clearly posed. One page said, "Thanks for always being there. You're not my real dad, but you're real to me." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Not because I still believed it, but because I once had. I held that page, looked at the handwriting, and realized that being needed was never the problem. It was why I was needed. That's what broke me. I didn't throw the album away. I put it back and sealed the box. Not for sentimental reasons, but because it was a reminder of how far I'd come. That man, the one who had read those words and teared up, deserved to be remembered. He may have been naive, but he loved with everything he had. And that's not a weakness. It's a strength most people never have the courage to show. That man didn't just deserve to be remembered, he deserved to be honored. One night, a friend invited me to a bonfire at his house. I almost didn't go, but I said yes. It had been too long since I had laughed among other people. Too long since my presence wasn't tied to my wallet or my usefulness. We sat under the stars, passing drinks and telling stories. No one mentioned my ex. No one asked about the drama. They just welcomed me. Without pity. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Belonging. Not the kind you buy, but the kind you earn just by showing up, even when something inside you is telling you to disappear. When I got home that night, a little buzzed and warm, I stood on my doorstep for a moment and just looked around. The place was mine, not just legally, but emotionally. No ghosts. No bitterness. Just me. I poured a glass of water, sat on the porch, and watched the quiet street. I thought about everything I had lost, and everything I had finally found. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a man who had been used. I felt like a man who had survived being needed for the wrong reasons, and who finally needed nothing more than his own blessed peace.